productivity can be measured in three ways. There's a physical measure around productivity, units of output versus units of input. There can be the dollar measure that most organisations look at. But then there's also a ratio or an index, and that's a sort of an area where I think other organisations can look to improve.
Well, let's just look at the service sector, particularly in terms of that ratio. And start with retail. How does a small to medium-sized retailer measure productivity? Yeah,
look, there's some really good examples of retailers doing this well. I think the big end of town do it particularly well with the same store sales. That's been proven to be an overall productivity measure that has served the industry well. But then you drill down into the real operational metrics, and there's four. There's productivity measures that relate to customers and customer transactions. There's productivity measures that relates to stock and how well the stock is working. There's also property, and the space that the retailer uses. And then there's employee productivity.
Let's take the first of those, customer productivity. How do you measure that?
A simple way is looking at the number of transactions. So, and that can be measured over any type of measure. So number of transactions per unit of revenue or sales. It can be also measured against the number of employee hours or those that are working in the store.
And what about employees themselves? How do we measure their productivity?
Yeah, so again, that can be store outcomes like revenue per store over the number of hours that are being deployed into that retail store. What's important here is the number of hours. You want to get to the unit of measure that makes a difference that you can influence. Total number of employees is too fixed a measure for retailers, where you have demand fluctuating throughout a day or an hour even. What you want to be able to do is you want to be able to match your revenues and your costs to get the optimal use of that level of input, being the labour hours.
But you think it's best to start with yourself and measure what you're doing year in, year out to see how your productivity has changed as a service business? Absolutely,
and the year-on-year measures are the most important, and you want to be able to see progress over time. The one thing I would say here, Robert, is that most organisations have not spent enough time working out what their fundamental unit of production is. And the advice I'd be giving to all organisations is get clarity on what your fundamental unit of production is, whether you're in a services business or a manufacturing business. Get that defined and agreed across all levels, and then go away and start measuring.
Well, all right, I'm a retailer. What's my fundamental unit of production?
Depending on the retailer, of course. Comparing a supermarket with a different retailer is not right, but it could be the number of customers, as an example, or it could be a unit of revenue. I'll come back to the three types of measures that I said that you can use productivity for. It can be in a physical sense, it can be in a dollar sense, or it can be in an index sense.
So first of all, we set out as a service business, what is our fundamental unit of production, and then look at the cost of making that.
That's exactly right, and then break the cost down into its various components. The airline industry has done a good job of this over time, where they have looked at things like airline seat kilometres, and then everything, whether it's fuel or whether it's labour or energy or manufacturing component parts or equipment, is all aligned to this ASK measure.
Those organisations that find their productivity is not good, what are their alternatives?
Look, there's two ways. You can look to change your input mix or look to change your output mix, or both, I guess. The alternatives of doing nothing is you go out of business. I think most statistics show that if you do nothing, that over a period of 5 to 10 years you'll go out of business.